Hello guys, David Vose here. Oh man, it's snowed yesterday, but nothing really stuck. There's a little here and there in the cold areas under the shade, but it's melting off right away. A little bit of sunshine shining through now. And I got everybody fed and I'm going to sit down and I want to do a video. I haven't had enough time to really do a video every day, but I'm trying. I've been running around a lot, as you know, but anyway, I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. And today I think we're going to have a very interesting discussion. Let's just have a discussion. That's what I want to do. Let's get real. You ever tried that? Get real. In other words, sometimes we tell people what we believe. Now, I believe, okay, why? What is the belief? What do you have beliefs for? Would we really have beliefs in a natural world where nobody was telling us we had to believe something? When you were born, nobody said, okay, clean him all up, swab him down, give him a little white garment. Why? I don't know, maybe because cotton and linen are white, naturally. Perhaps it wasn't some conspiracy. But the baby is then smacked on the bottom, put into her mother's arms, the umbilical cord is cut, and all of that's done. And the first thing we do is we tell that child, okay, now, in order to be a good little baby, we want you to believe that outside that room, on the other side of the wall, is chairs and doctors and nurses. And outside and down the hall, you go outside. We want you to believe that there are trees and streets and little cars running around with weird kind of horns, honk, honk, and stoplights and policemen and all of this that you're going to have to go through as you get older. Well, we don't. We don't even want to burden that child with all of this stuff that we know is outside that hospital door. All we want to do with that child is hold the baby. We don't assume the child is incapable of knowing he might be bad. We've got to train him up because he might turn out bad. We don't think that. Maybe somebody teaches that in some church, but mothers don't think that. All they think of, that's my baby. And they don't immediately think, okay, I've got to teach this child what might be on the other side of the room. No, you just nurse the baby, look at the baby, love the baby. The baby feels your love. That's all he needs right now. Just to know that you love him. There's no fear or insecurity in the child because the baby's holding on to mama. And all the baby can understand is mama's there and everything's going to be all right. We don't need to have a set of beliefs or doctrines to get through that day. Now, maybe after a few days, or maybe that day, you'll leave the hospital, take the baby with you, and the baby's eyes are real big and looking around, and the baby begins to experience reality. No beliefs necessary. As the baby goes forward and sees more things and is given more responsibilities as he grows up, he does trust or have faith that certain things are going to happen based on the things he's already experienced. But nobody sits down and says, now listen, you've got to have this kind of belief about what might happen tomorrow based on everything you've gone through. We've got a book written down here and we've got your name in it and we've gotten all your records together and we've made sure that we've taken and monitored everything you've done, right? We've got some Santa Claus over there making sure the boys are naughty or nice and writing it all down, right? Depending on what you're going to get in the afterlife for your being good or bad or something. Nobody does that. Not on any reality scale that we can comprehend. We don't do that with our kids. Now, there may be some kids when they're teenagers that get little lessons and prerogatives and responsibilities based on what they've done. But again, that's a learned behavior that we're told You know, if you're a good little Mormon and you're 18, now you put a suit and tie and you go on a mission. I mean, that's completely arbitrary. What do people do? What would a person do if they were just living in the world naturally? Well, like I said, the baby doesn't have to know things that it doesn't know, and nobody's keeping track of the things he should have known, but he didn't pay attention. Because you know why? Because every child progresses kind of at their own rate, because there's nobody forcing them that they got to pass a classroom now, where they got to know their ABCs by the time they're 2. I mean, there's some indicators of normal growth and what we think is average. We understand that some babies are a little slower at this or that. They may have had some disadvantages, maybe medical issues. Maybe they were alone and they were an only child and they were always around grown-ups. They may have learned faster, but eventually they learned to read, and nobody was upset with that. There's no timetable. We know that all the kids will eventually grow up. And guess what? All of them, unless there's some medical issues or emotional setbacks, serious crises in the child's life where he loses his mother or father and goes into some sort of Great Depression. There could be all kinds of reasons to put that kid on a trajectory where he will not be able to keep up with some of his peers. But nobody's saying that the child's bad, that he needs to go to hell and burn forever because he didn't keep up with the rest of the class. This is nonsense. This is insanity. Nobody would do it, and anybody who does it is in a cult, and they need literally to be told they're wrong. The elders of the community, society, should know better, and we should not be allowing religious cults to indoctrinate little children from the time they're born in something that nobody knows. Well, listen, we believe God has a big white beard and he's sitting up there and he's got rainbows and there's unicorns running around and fairies, and you've got to believe this too. Well, what happens when we die? How do we know? Well, we've got a book here, and the book says, okay, that'd be all right if we knew that most people that lived were smart and wise people. We knew where the book came from. We knew it was from the elders. We knew it was from ancient traditions and individuals that had been credited with seeing the Lord in heaven, and we trusted his testimony. Well, yeah, that's kind of what Christianity is, isn't it? They spoke to the Lord. They saw the Lord. They saw miracles. But in that case, they said, you can do miracles too. We just want you to believe us. Only in that, if you believe us enough, you might go and try some of these things that we've told you. And the only reason why people needed to believe is because they had been put down for so many years because of cults, because of religion. Remember, Jesus was talking to Judaism and the Pharisees and the scribes who were hypocrites and who put great burdens on people. The only reason he was teaching people is to unburden them. He got up and he opened up into Isaiah and he says, I came to give liberty to those that are bound. That was his message, not indoctrination. Simply, I love you. So did Jesus teach a bunch of things that we have to learn or we're not going to heaven? No. Because we're his children and we can't even comprehend anything beyond what we physically see in this world. All we can be told is we love you. You will live forever. I love you. I've come to tell you the Father loves you. Yeah, the Bible's just about that simple. And I'll show you that so is the Vedas and all of the ancient scriptures of the East and all of the other holy writings in every nation that's ever been on the earth till now. There was never a book that said, look, we went to heaven. We're going to describe the whole city, what it looks like. It's literal. There are certain beings there. We call them this. They look like that. At the end of your life, you'll go there. You'll go through a transitioning period. You'll go there, then they'll say your training's not up and you'll have to go back. We don't have any of this information in such literal terms. But we do have some. And this is something Christianity needs to know. Because they're listening to their Protestant teachers tell them stuff they don't know about some vague subjects that nobody's even quite sure what they're talking about anymore. You know, when we talk about resurrection, we don't really know what that means. Well, I believe in the resurrection. Okay, but what do you mean by that? Well, I don't know, but that's what my church does, you know. Well, you see, that's got quite a few different ideas involved. I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that you're recreated. You don't exist between death and resurrection. You don't exist. You're gone. And that's the saddest belief I've ever heard in my life. If that's true, it's almost like there is no afterlife and there is no divine being. Because if you are without existence, boom, into oblivion, with no consciousness, no existence, even your molecules have gone into the dust. And somehow you're going to tell me, just believe and be a good little boy. And some guy up in the sky, it's this big, you know, Michelin tire man in the sky with rainbows and fairies and unicorns. When you die, he's keeping a record of all that you've done, whether naughty or nice. And if you can pass that test and be good enough, he'll recreate you. Well, how do I know it's me? I'm a being. I'm a spiritual being. I have not just what I know. I mean, that's like a tape recorder. Like you could download people's memories into a computer, but you can't download their soul. Now, a soul, unbeknownst to most people who don't know this, and I wouldn't expect you to know this, we are a being that does not die. We don't ever perish. We're in the immortal world, not this perishable, temporary world. So that is it. The desire pulls things in. And if you get trapped in a desire based on fear or ignorance or lust or anxiety, we can get trapped in this bubble of imagery. We may even develop these images into monsters, which makes us even more afraid. And we can get trapped in there. And that's what being in this world is. That's why it's a classroom, because we need to grow out of those fears. We need to become, just like when you're exercising, your body doesn't have the strength to lift a certain amount of weight, but you start with a smaller amount and you exercise and you build muscle, and then you can lift more. So you start here as a novice and you grow and you become strong physically. The mind also needs to be exercised to become strong. And the idea is that we can overcome the flesh, the Bible says. So that's a statement in the Bible. It's a good example. What does it mean to overcome the flesh? Nobody knows. There isn't any doctrine. Jesus didn't write down exactly what it means in a 50-page manuscript, detailing it so that everybody could. And even if he did, it would still be up to us to experience it, to really know it. So we're not being told. That's why the Bible's not that clear about what afterlife is like and what, you know, or even the Bhagavad Gita, because nobody that's ever been to the perfect world and is living in this perfect, beautiful place where they have all this power and control over the physical wouldn't normally be in your classroom. They'd have gone on to a higher and higher realm or classroom. The only way you would ever meet somebody who knows what is the truth because of experience is if you met somebody like Jesus who said, listen, I was sent here to tell you something that I know because I was there. I know the Father. The Father loves me. The Father has given me commandments, and he has sent me here, and he said he wants me to lay down my life and take it up again. I want you to know that he is love. I come to tell you that he is love. Now, that is something we accept on his testimony. And we're not ridiculed because we don't believe somebody if we don't know anything about them. What we're ridiculed of in the first century, they were kind of looked down upon if they didn't believe in Jesus because Jesus was doing miracles to prove it. Now, the Bible says, happy are those who have not seen and yet believe. Why would it be good then if we haven't seen the miracles to believe in somebody's testimony? Because we're talking about interpreting the scriptures, and again, I'm interpreting it now. But the apostles are saying that there will come a time when faith will be hard to find. Very few people will know the truth. They will burn the books. They will murder the martyrs that died before you were on this earth, that knew things, that saw things, that were testifying of things that they saw. And it's going to be a big apostasy it's like chaos, and people really won't know the truth. And if you can know the truth then, or have faith during that time, then happy will you be. Now, it's not saying that you ought to have more faith if you haven't heard any testimony from somebody who's seen it. It's not saying if you are in a world where there's no answers that you should know everything. It's simply saying, happy are you if you have this faith, because obviously something has given you that faith. And it isn't and he's not talking about indoctrination from churches, because those individuals are all indoctrinated differently and they're all wrong. And most of that Jesus condemns. Woe to those who say lo here and lo there, and who tell great, amazing things that aren't true, and are, teachers of darkness and not light and all this. So he didn't like that. What he told us to do is just love one another and give the testimony that you have within you. And you couldn't have gotten it if you have the testimony that prompts you to love, that leads you in the right direction, that assures you of everlasting life. Then you got it from the Lord. And happy are you if you haven't seen it, but you went and took it upon yourself to go to prayer like Elijah did. Now, you can learn from Elijah and get a testimony from Jesus or the apostles or others. But if you went out in the field and got down on your knees and prayed and fasted 40 days and 40 nights, happy are you who have not seen and yet believe. See, that's what that means. So let's get real. The Bible does not, the way it is translated or written, appear to teach reincarnation. The word reincarnation is not in the Bible. Well, guess what? There is a difference of opinion, as I said, about just about everything. Some Jehovah's Witnesses believe that resurrection means that you don't exist. But he'll create one just like you. Oh, that'll help, right? I want to be me, not somebody just like me. Maybe all my memories will be downloaded into a clone. Is that me? I didn't like that. First of all, because I don't believe that. I don't think that's correct. I think that our spirit is immortal. It's the flesh that is temporary. We're all children of the living deity. I think there's enough verses in the Bible. I think there's many verses, plenty, that teach us that we are immortal. There's places where it says, hand such a one over unto Satan for the destruction of the flesh, that his spirit might be saved in the day of the Lord. So we can have the flesh and we can have the spirit. They're different. And the spirit's going to be saved, but the flesh may die. Fear not those who can kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. I could give you many verses. They quote some verses in Psalms or Ecclesiastes that seems to say that when you die, you know nothing, right? But obviously, they just take that one little verse out of context. It is saying you don't know any longer anything's going on under the sun, because you're not consciously here anymore. But later it does say that the spirit ascends to the Lord who gave it. Now, it doesn't expand on what that means in that particular verse, but there are certainly lots of other verses that say that we are saved. And we're going to read some scriptures. I, as you guys know, believe in reincarnation, and I will explain to you why I do. I do believe that now that I know of the idea of reincarnation and transmigration, I believe. Now that I've heard and understood what that is, and I look at the verses in the Bible, it tends to make me believe that they automatically believe those things too. And that's what these verses are conveying when they were talking about Elijah returning, or Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. Okay, that's not reincarnation, but it's returning as a person. When John the Baptist was beheaded, they thought Jesus was John the Baptist reincarnated, or let's use another word, returned. Now, may they have had some other slight variable of their understanding? Certainly. But it seems as though the early first century Christians and Judeans knew, and many of them believed, in the prophets returning. And then we have other parables that I have talked about. We've talked about the guy that was born blind. Who sinned? This man, or the man, or his parents, that he was born blind? If the man was born blind, then the only way he could be responsible for his blindness is if he had lived before. And this is what the disciples were asking. Now, we could go through lots of these, and I don't want to go through that today. I've done videos on this. What I want to share with you today is just something more important. And that is that we must allow and be tolerant of other people's views, especially since we're living in a world where we just don't know. And the most important thing, because of the apostasy, we don't know. And the cults and the lies and many of the books and the plain and precious things being burned and destroyed, and we don't have it, and we never read it, and we don't know what it says. And if we did read it, we'd find out most of it's parabolic. Now, the wise men may have had certain teachings. And I think to a large degree we can trust some of them, at least in the sense that if all of the philosophers were talking about reincarnation, as they were, Plato and Pythagoras and Socrates, maybe they got it from somewhere, because they had been, as I've said many times before, Pythagoras was a student of the mystery schools. Not only did he learn from Solon and Thales, Egyptian priests, they were taught all the ways of the Egyptians, like Moses was, but Pythagoras went to Persia and learned all of the Zoroastrian teachings, and he went to India and learned and graduated and became a master at this knowledge, initiated, passed the class, and became a master. So while I've never gone through any of these initiatory mystery schools. I never went through them, except that I was trained and taught from a few people that I would say knew the truth. But remember, even people who claimed to know the truth, or some who were in a lineal descent from those who did know the truth, it was claimed, could have forgotten some of it and may not have understood it correctly. We're talking about humans and our own ability to interpret. So if you could talk to a prophet himself who straight up went to the heavens, you'd have to first believe him, trust him. Second of all, he'd have to be able to know how to understand what he saw. He might have misunderstood some parts of what he saw and was told. And for him to be able to translate what he saw so that you could understand everything that he saw and believed is also going to be a problem. The only way to know anything is to really be there. And the second best is to go there and experience it in spirit. And that means to leave your body and in your mind see and be and do. And then it's like you've experienced it. And we have a testimony. And this is what testimony is. This is why the Bible talks about prayer. You get all these people going to churches and religions, and they say, oh, well, I believe in this and that and everything. Why? Well, look at this book. This book is like the revelation of God. And it's a beautiful book. And it's all beautiful red. And it's got a lot of pictures and illustrations. And it's a very good book. Why don't you read it? So you got what you believe out of a book. Well, of course. Then you don't really know. Well, no. So I'm trusting that these individuals who say they are spokesmen for the Lord, without any real testing involved. I mean, the Bible itself says if they say something and it turns out false, then you don't follow them. And yet people like Jehovah's Witnesses have been false prophet, and they've been proven to be false prophet. And people are still reading their books and saying, well, I trust them. They're the faithful and they're wise servant. And this is so insane. But it's not just Jehovah's Witnesses, friends. It's all of us. Now, modern people today are having another problem. They become to where they feel like they don't want to hear or listen to anybody. They see all the people, all the talking heads, they all have different ideas. And many of these ideas leads to things like Jehovah's Witnesses are excommunicating and disfellowshipping people and ruining families and destroying people's souls, and people commit suicide, and people say, no, that's not for me. And yet some of the Jehovah's Witnesses are still in that cult. And I heard somebody say the other day, and I want to say it again here. I want to reiterate what this other person said. I don't know his name. But I remember I saw a video a couple of days ago, and he was saying that not only are Jehovah's Witnesses or their elders or their prophets or whatever, their governing body, are they reprehensible and are responsible, I should say, for all of the evil and harm that they've done. I would call them hypocrites and people who are going to be compensated for some of the things that they're doing. They should know better. Their conscience should bear witness with them that they are lying. But Jehovah's Witnesses themselves, the millions of little peasants that follow their teachings, are basically about as responsible for this, because they have been regurgitating this ignorance, constantly coming with new light, meaning they've changed their mind, where something they taught 20 years ago would get you disfellowshipped, ruin your life. Now they no longer disfellowship for that, and they think it's a good thing to do the exact same thing that you said not to do. If people knowingly go out and represent that organization, they are as guilty as the people who is teaching it. But I'm just saying Jehovah's Witnesses as an example because it's the same for Protestants. But as I was going to say, we also have this other group of people, that the young people today that don't believe in anything. And this is what's sad, because the Bible even itself says that they bring reproach upon the truth. You have to take responsibility. These are your brothers and sisters. We need to love them, help them, and educate them. Mothers got to educate their children. Fathers got to. But if you don't know what to believe, then is it okay to teach them some kind of insanity and evil? No. Everybody has a conscience. We're not required to know whether we're actually transmigrated this way or that way, or were we once birds and now we're men, or we don't have to know exactly for sure how this all works. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. And we don't need doctrines like that. In fact, it's harmful, especially when you don't know what you're talking about. You're basing it on what somebody you believe, you're interpreting some book that was a guy who really had no authority in the first place. Frederick Franz, who is he? Well, he's the president of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. Oh, I don't care. What gives him any authority? He has failed prophecies in the past, and his brothers that he advocates you listen to, that no longer do they let you read their books because they become outdated and they're morally stupid now. And look at Christianity. The Protestants, they just said believe in Jesus, and they made some very direct claims. Don't believe in Hinduism. That's false. You've got to keep all these laws of the Old Testament. Many Protestants still believe this. If you lie or steal or break the Sabbath. But After the apostles died, there was apostasy. There was ignorance. People just didn't know what to believe, and it's being perpetuated. That's a problem. And those who perpetuate things that they don't know, either out of fear or out of wanting to please their peers to get gain, because they're afraid that they won't get a good job. I mean, look, I told you guys a story about Jehovah's Witnesses offering me a big job and, the prettiest girl in the congregation and all this stuff, as long as I would just keep my mouth shut and let them tell lies and pretend I agreed with it. They called it I'd have to be a good example. And if I was a good example, then the Holy Spirit was saying, obviously, that I was somebody that needed to be promoted because I was giving others a good example. That's what they want. But that sounds great, except the problem is that to truly be giving people a good example, one would have to be truly wise, and that would mean to not say things you didn't believe in, or corroborate with others that you have no idea if they're right, or just assume that you believe things that you really don't know anything about you're talking about, and perpetuate ignorance. That's not a good standing before the Lord. That's not a good example for others. And this is what's happened. It's lies upon lies, and all this is wrong. So, reincarnation. Is it taught in the Bible? I think it is, but I don't think the Bible that we have left, any of the words that they've allowed to remain in there, are going to say things so specifically that you're going to be able to understand the whole thing. We've done video after video showing the scriptures that I think insist that something almost exactly like reincarnation must be true. And that the ones who wrote the New Testament obviously had this in the back of their mind. Where did they get it? Like, what was the truth before the apostles came along? Well, Jesus came along and he was looking at these individuals and they didn't know either at that point. They were all hypocrites and just like people today in a lot of ways. And Jesus said, you don't understand what you're talking about. Love one another. Don't hate one another. I want mercy. And they couldn't get this, right? But Jesus somehow knew all these things. Because as the story goes, our Heavenly Father loves us. And from time to time, he sends prophets. And at the end of the ages, at that time, 2,000 years ago, which was the end of a certain dispensation of the law. Just like in the days of Noah was the end of a certain dispensation. Then the whole world perished and they were judged. Well, then we had the time when Christ came and Christ said, listen, I have come down from the Father to tell you something. And he didn't write books and books and books and books and all the intricate details, but he just said, this is what I come to tell you, to love one another. And to know that you have eternal life. He didn't say exactly how. In fact, the apostle says we don't know what we will be like. But when we see him, we shall be like him. We could infer, and I do this all the time, and we can, I believe, come up with some very clear understanding. However, each and every one of us can go to the Father all on their own. You're only a brother or a sister in this group. And all of your brothers and sisters have the exact same ability to go to the Father beyond the veil. We'll talk about that here if we get to it in a minute, that the veil is the flesh. But there's more than just what we've been told, obviously. But we don't know all the details. But we know that there's something beyond the flesh. It's likened to a veil. Does that mean that there is a whole beautiful earth made out of spirit that we're going to go? We don't know. But I think we can conjecture easily. And as far as myself and many others who have had the ability to be conscious while, I guess you might say, kind of like dreaming, but conscious dreaming, and they call this leaving your body. Is it literally leaving your body? It's been likened to your spirit going and being focused and there, present with something, but not conscious in the body. And yet you're still connected to the body with a silver cord. We find a verse that says this in Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Is that the true interpretation? I think so. But why is it then that some people interpret the Bible and we say they're wrong, and when I do it, we say, well, this isn't wrong, this is correct? Or others. Because people who know that they're just interpreting words and praying and trusting the Holy Spirit to give them wisdom and understanding, they do it with caution, with love, and with more understanding to begin with, and they don't ignorantly go headlong into believing stuff that other people said without checking it out. So all we know is just a conviction within us. And depending on how high up the chain this information and knowledge is, you're going to have varying degrees of knowing that. For instance, I trust that I'm going, if this body of mine that I have here, if it were to die, I've seen people die, I know that the body dies. I see in my mind's eye the real being still being alive, and this outer body just peeling off. And I can certainly imagine that when we're out of the physical consciousness, we may then be in another consciousness where angels or spirits of different, there may be different levels or layers, but I combine that with testimony of people who have died and come back, or almost died, if you want to put it that way. My own mother, who didn't believe, because she had been a Jehovah's Witness and been taught that you don't exist when you die. Well, she died for a moment on the gurney or whatever it was. And my mother told me that she rose above her body and looked down. Is that proof? No. All of this, though, is just stuff that confirms what we know in ourselves. And that is that certainly this world, this life that we have, is precious. And it's complicated. It's a mystery. But I have a witness inside of me that says, yes, I think, therefore I am. And others have testified that they saw Jesus, they saw him do miracles, they wrote books about it. I took that as simply a testimony, just for what it was. And I said, I'm going to try it, because the world itself is a complex thing. It was hard for me to believe that you would just live and have these relationships with people, build houses and enjoy and have fun, and all of a sudden one day you die and it's a big tragedy and you don't ever come back. And I didn't want to believe that. I'll admit, I don't want to believe in non-existence. I don't want to believe that I'm going to die. I don't think anybody does. I've heard people say, oh, I want to die. And I think it's just because they think you mean in this world where you're going to suffer forever. And I don't think people want to suffer the way they've been suffering forever. But I know I've gone through pain that's so excruciating, and I still held on, because the pain was not as bad as the idea that I wouldn't be able to live. I wouldn't give up my life. I would endure the pain. How did I get that conviction? Well, me personally, I've gone and I've prayed and I've fasted. Probably more than an average person. But even if you haven't gone that far, and you didn't fast for 40 days, and you didn't get an angelic visitation, you still have a voice, a spiritual voice within you saying, love is good. Because caring for others is exemplary. Why? If there's no point to any of this, we can sort of, in our own spirit, grasp and know that being is something that no one can really understand. But it doesn't necessarily have to do with this little lifespan that we're living, this little classroom. And so we think maybe this is just a classroom and we are learning. And wouldn't it be wise to think that I need to love people and not be a hypocrite or proud and try to force, control people for my own ambition? Wouldn't we learn these kinds of things? And you could say, well, if you were living in this world the way it is, and getting ahead means you made more money and you could provide for your family better, and all you gotta do is lie a little bit and cheat a little bit, and you get more money, why not? Why is it because of religion then stamped into our heads that you've got to tell the truth, you should never lie, should always be loyal, should be kind? Is there a law that says you must be kind? How do we know if we're supposed to be kind? Maybe we should be bullies. See, I can't prove to you that you should be kind. If you don't want to believe that, you can find any amount of reasoning. Because you might say, well, first of all, we don't know if we're going to live forever, so you might as well live for today. And take, because this is the only life we get. Enjoy it while you can. And you say, yeah, but what about the other guy that you're taking from? Well, look at around and look at the dogs eat dogs and the lions going after the rabbits. And this is the way nature is. And if you're not up to the test, your little weak soul, well, too bad, but I'm stronger than you and I'm going to succeed. All right. Well, that may sound logical, huh? But there's something about that doesn't strike me as what I want to do. I don't know. Maybe it's because when my mother loved me for no reason other than she loved me and held me and fed me and nurtured me, that I felt grateful. What is gratefulness, Dave, you coward? You're just an ignorant little weak soul. Well, I have come to the conclusion that you're a strong and powerful being because you've overcome that little pain. See, the people that are pushing, shoving, and abusing others to get ahead, those are the ones who are afraid because they don't feel strong enough to live without taking what you have to live. And they don't see the logical solution that I see, that the universe is infinite and that there's plenty for everybody. And therefore, I can come to the conclusion that love is the answer. And I can tell you, and you can disagree, but I won't allow you and your negative behavior around my family after that. Because you might hurt my children. And I'm sorry, I love my children. And you don't have to tell me why, or I shouldn't love them. I know. Yes, I think I do know. I don't think it's a matter of conjecture. I know that I love my children. I have one child, my daughter. And I know I'm not being brainwashed. And I'm not weak for being there for her, for giving of myself, something I might want, but giving it to her to benefit her. Well, how does that benefit me? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it will actually in the long run, right? I'll have somebody who will have my back later on. But we're not talking about logic that way. I knew that I loved my daughter the day she was born. Even the day I knew she was going to be born. And nothing would have come in between us. I would have given my life. Why? Why am I so fully convinced? Maybe that's the difference. Maybe that's what makes up the good and the bad. Right? And maybe those little weak, mentally weak people that are afraid, maybe they will grow one day and become more mature and in another life That makes sense to me. That maybe they're small, that maybe they're young, immature. Maybe they haven't gone through the experiences that we have. Because when you go through the life experiences and find out that love is a thing, and you are strong enough not to be persuaded by the herd mentality and the cults and people just demanding you believe this or that, and you are strong enough to think for yourself, I don't think you're going to discard love. But I think you'll move from there to reading the ancient writings, the testimonies of the prophets, and seeing that there's a thread throughout all of them, a divine testimony that says that we are immortal. And if you go back, as I said, you can go to Plato and see because he was a person that thinks maybe a little bit like we do in the West, because he was a philosopher, scientist, had to have information that made sense. This led to all these other philosophers that finally came down to people like Kant and Nietzsche and these guys who gave up on the divine being and used twisted logic. Why? Because their heart was wrong. Anyone, a child, knows what love is. And on that testimony alone wants to do good and kindness. But a bully, if they are a bully because they're weak, they're afraid, they're scared, they think you're a monster trying to get them because they're in this little sissy little world that they don't know that they are strong, that there is enough for everyone. Then in that condition, and why would they be in that condition? Maybe because they're just little weak children that hadn't lived long enough. And if we only live 50, 70, 80 years, then maybe we didn't get all this wisdom and knowledge in this one lifetime. Maybe the testimony of the ancient ones is true, and we transmigrate and we learn by the things in which we suffer. And as the Apostle Paul says, we are transformed. That's clear enough. Transformed. Our form is changed from glory to glory. Our form, transformed. That's what the word means. I'm not making this up. The Apostle Paul said this. We are transformed. Our body, our form will transform into another form from one glory to another glory, even as was done by the Lord. Because I think that's pretty detailed. But I'm saying that you could possibly misunderstand that verse. And if you find somebody that just doesn't believe in the Lord and doesn't want to even investigate, it's probably because they're weak, immature soul that's being captivated and lured into this rotten world that it's a bunch of children, bickering and hating and fighting to try and get ahead, and they're not getting anywhere. But after time, they'll learn on their own. Leave them alone. Don't judge them. We judge those inside. Our brothers and sisters, we sit down together and we talk it over. But those outside of our community, our family, we can't reach them sometimes. But we don't judge their immortal existence, their eternity. The Lord is their judge. And we have to also imagine, if we have that love within us, and since our Bible says that our Father in heaven is love, that he would feel the same as us and he would hope and want all of those ignorant peoples to grow up one day and learn. But how? By the things in which they suffer. We're all being transformed from glory to glory. And if you've been educated and you've come to a place where you grasp what love is and why it's true, because scientifically we're making this world around us ourselves. So if we have greed and fear, we make monsters and hate and poor quality of life and tribulation and we don't pass a test. That's not good. Nature says, no, you can't stay that way forever. You've got to grow up. So we come back and do it again. That makes sense. But for those who have seen visions, gone somewhere in spirit, that is beneficial to help you believe and to know. Nobody knows everything. But we get to a point where we know enough that we are certain that our course of love is the only and correct way. Those who know that, and those who don't, they don't. I'm only talking to those who know it and those who think they could learn it at this point. Those who don't understand that they'll click off here, or they probably already clicked off, and we're not talking to them. They'll get their understanding their own way by feeling the burning sensation when they put their hand in the fire. And eventually they'll pull their hand out. And I will personally have mercy on them as a way to show them and testify to them that I'm not afraid, that life is immortal, that they cannot hurt me. I am the Son of the living deity. And I say to that mountain, be moved, and it is moved. And I'm not afraid. If you need my coat and you need my material help, I'm not afraid to give it to you. Like I'll never get it back again. I've got to overcome you and fight you for these things, these material things. I know these material things aren't the more important things. They're things you acquire in passing. But what is important is to acquire the strength of mind and the truth and the integrity, where you understand what everyone thinks ought to be true, if they've lived at all in this world, that life should be good and it should be kind and it should be wonderful and everybody should be happy. It's just that some people think maybe it's not, so therefore I better get what I can now. But those of us who think, well, maybe that, there's gotta be, there's gotta be, my mind is rested enough, I'm calm enough, I'm not afraid, I'm not so instinctually controlled by nerves and instinctual memories and reflexes that I can stop and say, what is this all about? But at the same time, I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at the scriptures. And I'm going to have some faith in that. Because unbeknownst to people today in the West, our Bible teaches the same things as the other Bibles. And we've been trying to delve into this to show that people have been misunderstanding the Bible, and the Bible's not about Judaism. Jesus came to condemn that and to gather the lost sheep, which are the pagans, and that their beliefs are spoken of in the Old Testament too. And that you have a story in the Old Testament of this egotistical deity of vengeance who's murdering and killing people. And yet nobody's getting eternal life. And everybody's being sentenced to hell. And nobody's getting this is not the right way. And Jesus comes along and says, hey, forgive one another. Turn the other cheek. That's not the right way. Your father's the devil. And for those who can grasp this, then the Bible is an amazing book. But for those who want to use it or abuse it, or don't even want to understand it, they're just trying to pick it apart and prove to the world that it's illogical for there to be prophets and wise men that we should read and maybe gain some wisdom from. So yes, all of their testimony can be reproduced today in you or me or anyone else. We can ourselves go out into the field and bow down and pray if we can humble ourselves and seek the truth by knowing we don't know the truth. But the proud that think they know everything are never going to be able to find the truth. But how do we know that Pythagoras and Socrates interpreted their mystery school teachings correctly? Because they believed in reincarnation. Is that good enough for me? Pythagoras believed in it, therefore I do? Well, I would have to say, let me look at the Bible. I was raised on that, right? I don't know anything about the other scriptures yet. I'm a young man. I'm looking into the Bible itself. And I see some indication that we have an immortal soul in there. And I think, well, where do we go when we die? And then I find scriptures like some that we've mentioned, and I think, okay, hey, maybe Pythagoras is right. But I might have to be open then that there are other books, other prophets in other nations. Because Pythagoras also studied the Indian traditions, the Hindu and the Egyptian, the Zoroastrian. And I believe Jesus studied all of that. And I believe Paul. I think it talks about how Paul was on the road to Damascus, which is a hubbub of one of these initiatory mystery schools. And we've talked all about that. And he spent 3 years, which is the time it takes to go through the course. And at the end of that, it says he heard words that was unlawful to speak. And he went to a place called paradise, whether in the body or out of the body. There you go. That proves that the Apostle Paul, to me, had heard of some sort of initiatory process where you could leave your body and get firsthand knowledge and hear words that in this world you don't even speak for whatever reason, whether it's illegal because they don't want to throw their pearls before swine, because they will rend them under your feet, or whether they would just murder you, because they were being murdered for teaching these things. Remember, the Apostle Paul was saying, I'm being accused because I believe in the resurrection. But because we're Christians, we don't know what the Rig Veda teaches, or the Yajurveda, or the Upanishads, right? We don't know what Buddha believed. We don't even know what the Vedas are. We've heard about karma today. We've heard about reincarnation with this New Age movement. But as I've said, some of this is just wild tales. In the last 50 years, people have been hearing about yoga, and everybody's into yoga. Do you know it's not taught in the Bhagavad Gita or any of the ancient teachings? They don't teach that. That is how to breathe and how to sit and how to exercise and stretch it's all wonderful. There is Chinese medicine, the I Ching, all of that. I advocate reading it for your health. But what we're talking about is it required to reach nirvana sitting in a bow-legged position in one place and never, thinking normal thoughts or eating normal food, just being a hermit somewhere in a monastery in a home, beating your head up against a wall? I don't believe that. But you see, if you had actually read it and understood it, you'd know that nirvana is an age, 1 trillion years. It's the grand age of the cycle of a being becoming freed from this particular galaxy or whatever it is that we're in here. And therefore, if it takes 1 trillion years, you cannot achieve it by sitting in a corner beating your head against a wall. And therefore, those who teach this nonsense are completely confused and deceived. And that is not what Buddha taught. Buddha sat for a while in a position and prayed. Well, so did Elijah for 40 days and 40 nights and heard the still small voice. But that doesn't mean that Elijah spent his life sitting in a cross-legged position on the ground before a lotus flower. Those are symbols, friends. But if you'll read, Buddha had these ancient writings, and if you will read the writings, which most of us won't, we don't have time, I will tell you that there are concepts that are taught of cycles of birth and death, samsara, liberation. Many ascetic traditions teach this, but not just that they came up with it for some crazy reason, but there are textual references specifically speaks of reincarnation in the Rig Veda, in the Upanishads, and other Vedas, and the ancient scriptures, the I Ching in different places, Chinese teachings and their works, Confucianism, and Zoroastrianism and Persian religions, which, by the way, Daniel was the head of the Magi, which is the Persian religion. So most of what Zoroastrianism is today was based on the writings of Daniel, the prophet that we have in our Bible. But I am telling you that there are words that are put together in a string in the Vedas that unquestionably talk about cycles of birth and rebirth. And that very same thing is in our Bible. I just quoted one. The Apostle Paul saying that we're transformed. That means our form, our physical form, that's all that form ever is. It's the outer form. But you're a spiritual being, and your physical form will be transformed. And the Bible says, by the things that you suffer, you will learn. But I'm going to leave it there. We're over an hour, and I'll upload the rest of this video, about another hour of this, for tomorrow's video. So, guys, I hope you have a wonderful evening. May the Lord bless you. We'll see you tomorrow for part 2. Have a good one.